Hey everyone, welcome to another session with Shobi. These are our 30-minute live streams where we are inviting influencers and we are inviting people that are making significant contributions in education. And today, I am really pleased that we have Cimetta with us from Australia, Perth. She's the head of learning for APAC at Shobi. Welcome to the show, Lou.
Thanks, Abdul. Awesome to be here talking to you.
Wonderful. So let's kind of get right into it. Let's tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what's your background? Where have you come from? You're kind of like pretty new, but I'm sure it feels like you've been here for years at Shobi. So tell us a little bit about your kind of background and where you've come from.
Okay, so I'm a teacher. I'm an early childhood teacher by training. So I started out working with 0 to 8-year-olds. And I've taught through most of those primary year levels, became a school leader, and then moved into system leadership. So a system here in Australia is a big group of schools. So I worked for Catholic Education in Western Australia, which is 163 schools and massive diversity through from big schools in the city to very tiny country schools, and then remote schools you can only access by road 6 months of the year because during the wet it's actually flooded and you can't get through. So I worked for 10 years with those guys on the curriculum team, really refining my teaching and learning skills. And that's where I started, working with adults. I added it up the other day. It's been 17 years I've been working with leaders and teachers as my classroom, which kind of makes me feel a little bit old, right? So, but then from Catholic Education, I went and worked with Apple. So I was one of their development executives and worked locally with schools in Western Australia, but also was involved nationally in building out their early childhood initiative and looking at how we effectively use technology with our very youngest learners. From there, I actually went and ran my own business where I got to work intensively with some absolutely exceptional schools, really looking at taking them on the journey of, how do you create a digital strategy for your school? How do you take all your teachers on the journey? How do we make a massive positive difference to learning for our students? And then a whole 7 weeks ago, I got to join Shobi. And I'm really excited to be here as the head of learning development for Asia Pacific because it gives me a chance to do what I always wanted to do when I became a teacher, which was make a difference to kids' lives, right? Yeah. But you get to do it at scale. So we look after 40 countries in Asia Pacific. Wow. So my job is to really look at that from a strategic perspective. How do we work with governments and school systems, I guess, like local authorities for you guys in the UK? How do we work with clusters of schools? How do we work with principals to really help them achieve what they're trying to achieve with teaching and learning, and how do we use the amazing tools we've got at Shobi to make that happen? So, and at the moment, I'm also doing a little bit of moonlighting as a learning specialist in APAC as well, just as we build out the team. So a couple of hats to keep me well entertained.
Yeah. And I think kind of that's the great thing about what Shobi is offering at the moment, right? Because it's at the heart of learning. It's assessment, back. It's kind of the DNA. And what I love about it is that it doesn't really matter which country you go to, because when we're talking about learning within the classroom, these tools kind of really fit in. I mean, even before I joined Shobi, as I traveled and went through different countries, we were kind of talking about teaching and learning. We're talking about assessment and feedback and good practice and so on. And for me, that was kind of universal. And Shobi and Socrative, Explain Everything kind of fitted within those conversations. And I suppose the bigger conversation really with organizations was very much about, okay, you've got tools, you're in a school and in an organization. So then how do you actually build out a proper digital strategy? Yeah, that's going to work in an organization. And I think that is that's something I feel that certainly after COVID, there are more organizations that are sitting up and kind of trying to figure that out moving forward. So from your perspective, how have you kind of supported schools in creating a digital strategy, especially like in your role with the Catholic Education? I mean, like that's a huge of organization, and then different layers that you have within an organization, whether it's early years or primary or high school and so on. And then you add the complexity of 40 countries, right?
Yeah.
how does that actually work?
Yeah, I guess often schools contact you when they've made the decision to go one-to-one, right? And they'll say, look, we've made the decision to go one-to-one. We've got the money, we've bought the stuff. And now what? And so a lot of my conversation starts with the why. Why are you going one-to-one? Why are you using this technology in this space? Because for me, that first step is making sure everyone on that leadership team is really clear around that why, and you're all telling the same story on that why. So I've done lots of work with schools and with leaders in the past about really facilitating that conversation, so that everyone's really clear about this is what we're trying to achieve. And then the next big one for me is to say, technology is a terrible driver, right? And I love to quote Michael Fullan to them. I had the opportunity to meet Michael and work with him a little bit when I was working in Catholic education. And he says technology is a terrible driver, but it's a fantastic amplifier. And the schools kind of look at you because it's been their whole drive to get this technology into place, right? But if you just focus on the technology, it's kind of divorced to everything else we do in a school. Schools are about curriculum, schools are about pedagogy. So a lot of my conversations are around, well, what's your pedagogical focus for the next year? What are you trying to achieve with curriculum with your teachers? And let's put the technology to work to help you guys achieve that. Because I think when you do that, it really gets things moving. It also means, I think, for teachers that they don't feel like we're giving them more work to do. It's not this bolt-on extra that also has to happen. It becomes the tool that helps give you the solution to what's happening. So, okay, we're looking at questioning or feedback, and we're actually going to use Shobi as a space to come together as a professional learning community and track our content, or we're actually going to look at how we structure our lessons to make sure we've layered this in, and what might great feedback look like. So I think there's those sort of conversations. And then it's really working together as a school to say, what does great practice look like? And it's really funny when you work with schools, you say, okay, I'm going to get you to fill out 2 big bits of paper. We'll brainstorm together. What's good practice and what's not good practice? And 100% every time, everyone starts on what isn't good practice. We almost need to get that bit out of the way. We know what we don't like and we know what we don't want to have. And you kind of have to let people get that bit out first before they can actually talk about that good practice as well. But once you're able to articulate that and debate it and agree on it, you've got a bit of a map for how to go forward.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I think one thing that I've been kind of saying to educators, we were working with some principals and education leaders the other week here in the UK, and a statement that I use quite often is that good schools are consistent, outstanding schools are consistently good. So the question I have for them is, how do you create a consistently good learning experience, right? With technology, without technology, but what is your understanding of a good learning experience, and how do you build that consistency? So there's the challenge of, first of all, like you said, understanding what makes a good learning experience, and then there's the challenge of building consistency across the organization. And I kind of said every lesson doesn't have to be wow and amazing, but if you have the ability to create and get the understanding across to teachers of what a good a learning experience looks like, then that's actually quite powerful. So, like, from your experience, Lou, what makes a good kind of teaching and learning experience?
Yeah. Look, I work a lot with leaders, and often those leaders are your instructional coaches or your technology coaches. And, over the years, you develop a real cadence. And the number one question for me is your device the best tool for the job? And look, I do a lot of work with iPad. So is iPad the best tool for this job? Because there's going to be time when the answer to that question is no. And if the best tool is a pencil, then that's what we should use.
Absolutely.
But then but if we think that iPad or whatever device you're using can make some added value for us, then the next question for me is, what's our best mode of communication going to be for our students to demonstrate their learning? Are we going to get them to demonstrate what they know through photo, through video, through drawing, through audio, through text? They're the kind of 5 big ones. And certainly with some of the schools have gone a bit further. We've even talked about things like through animation or even through code. But it's really identifying what's the best digital communication mode for them to be able to demonstrate that learning. And then for me, the next step is, what are we going to ask the kids to do? Because you can't just give people information and then they've learned it, right? Otherwise, we could all just read books and be really good at everything. So a big part of our challenge is asking students to take some learning and do something with it. So I love the work from Fiorella and Mayer around generative learning. Let's show what we know through summarizing, through drawing, through mapping, through all of those tools. So I think looking for those really authentic opportunities for the students to demonstrate their work in different ways. And it's kind of been fun the last few weeks. We've been creating some content in Shobi, and it's so easy to do, right? So we can get in there and create a mind map. We can do drawings. We can have the audio. And I love that it's easy, because for me, my goal is to make the technology disappear. I want the kids to be focused on the learning. I don't want them having to be thinking about what they have to do and what they have to click. I want it to be so easy they can concentrate on what it is that they're supposed to be achieving.
Totally agree with that. Just kind of unpicking the generative learning piece, because I really love when educators kind of base their approaches on research. There's kind of a lot that we can take out of that, and I feel like the amplification part is done by the technology. I completely agree. With the fact that technology is not a driver, but it can certainly amplify that. And what I kind of get quite stoked about is when you read research pieces, and with our experience and knowledge of technology in the classroom, I always try to think about how can the technology amplify that research piece or that experience within the classroom, because even the Fiorella Mayer stuff, I think they did that in 2015, and between 2015 and now, the technology's done, the kinds of things that you can do is significantly more. But the generative learning part is kind of quite a powerful component, because it's kind of trying to say that the mind is not just a consumer of information, but you're taking information in all these rich and amazing ways that Shobi can kind of present, and then you're using it to kind of construct new information and kind of being able to use that to solve problems, which I think is really powerful stuff, and to be able to articulate that and have that as part of a learning experience, a part of a digital strategy is really kind of powerful. So Lou, just kind of moving on a little bit, I know a lot of the kind of impact stuff or change that happens quite often happens with leadership. So like how have you kind of worked with leaders to get that change to happen? What have been your approaches to that?
Yeah. I mean, you get to work with people at all different stages of their career, right? Often I'm working with quite young leaders who are experiencing leadership for the first time, and everyone rocks up wanting to do the absolute best job they can, right? No teacher or leader ever gets up on any given day and goes, I think I'll just do a pretty average job today. So everyone comes in with the best of intent. But with our newer leaders, it's really about how do you take people on a journey with you rather than doing things to people. And so, a lot of my work in that space is around, talking about how you build relationships and how you socialize ideas and how you work with key people who can then share that learning with others rather than you being the fount of all knowledge. Because as we all know, you can't be a prophet in your own land, right? So, it's that real mix of how do we use external people and then access people within the organization to take people on a journey. So there's that side of it. And then you have leaders who are further along the track, right? And so it becomes less of a mentoring situation and more of a coaching, where it's what are you trying to achieve, and you become that sounding board for those people. How well do they know their staff, what sort of things, where are their staff on the journey? Let's do some mapping and actually think about where people are and what they need. I mean, I love TPAC as a model, right? Good old Misha and Kohler, and they talk about you've got your I'll paraphrase it, your curriculum knowledge, your pedagogy knowledge, and your technological knowledge, your three circles. And the idea is to make them bigger and push them all together.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes with leaders, I'll sit down and they'll say, oh, this teacher, it's challenging. I'm trying to work out how to connect with them. And we'll actually map them. Because what we find is with our, highly experienced teachers, they have fantastic, great, big curriculum and pedagogy circles that are really strongly overlapped. And then if they're the kind of teacher who walks in and identifies on their first session with you, hey, I'm a bit of a Luddite, you're going to have problems with me. We know there's this little tiny circle off to the edge around technology that we need to do some work to build a bit and push into the middle. But there's so much to work with those teachers because they've had this rich experience. If the leader's trying to work with really young staff, they've got much smaller circles. They tend to be less connected, and they might have a bigger technology circle, but it's not overlapping pedagogy or curriculum in any way. They're all good at technology, we're all good at social media, but it's looking at how you can use technology to change learning. So I guess it's those different approaches depending where the school is and where they're going on the journey. And it's about understanding that every teacher is going to be at a different stage on the journey. So how do you have a layered approach that means everyone's growing? For me, it's less about everyone's at this end point, but it's more about that everyone's made some growth and everyone's moved along on that journey. No teacher left behind, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one of the things that definitely technology provides, and I know a number of schools that use Shobi kind of use this feature, is the ability to kind of share best practice. Because I've always said that it doesn't matter which school you go to, there's always going to be some amazing stuff that's happening in the classroom. There's always good things that are happening. The question is the leadership teams having the ability and the processes to capture good quality practice, right? And be able to share that. Now, certainly here in the UK, it's always a challenge to get everybody in a room and people to share a traditional professional development where everybody gets together and so on. Time constraints quite often just don't allow for that to happen. But again, I think technology can certainly play a role in that. And I know in Shobi, some schools have, like, they use the groups feature and they add teachers in there, and people will record video or just capture a bit of audio or so on, or even sometimes just take simple photos, and just share what went well, what was really good in the class today, and other people kind of pick up from. I've seen other practices where teachers will kind of new teachers will be present in the classes of more experienced teachers. They pick up ideas there, and vice versa as well. But the ability to add teachers into each of those classes and be able to see the content, I think, again, the degree of transparency that creates is kind of pretty powerful. And I think that there's a lot that can be done with that.
And I think sometimes you have to encourage your teachers in the beginning to actually share, because we're a pretty humble lot, teachers, and you tend to work often in isolation, so you don't really have anything to compare yourself against. And I love teachers. They kind of decide, well, because I can't see where other people are, I can't be that good, right? And so it often takes a bit of time and encouraging people to say, hey, this is awesome, you should share this, you should put this out there. But I love seeing that confidence in people, the way they grow when they start to see what's that their work does have value and the impact they have on others. And it's nothing to do with how long you've been teaching. You can see amazing work coming out of a graduate in a particular area. And
I think that's the thing. One kind of aspect of digital strategy is a question that I always ask leaders is that like, how do you share best practice? Like, what's the best medium for you to do that? How frequently is that happening? Is there a culture where teachers feel that, hey, I've done something really great and I want to share this with the rest of the teachers, and people can kind of see that? And I think there's a lot that can be done within that area. So just kind of moving along a little bit. We've talked about leaders, we've talked about systems, right? Going into students and the classroom, right? So how do if we've talked about creating good learning experiences with teachers and aspects of things that they pedagogy and so on, from an instructional perspective and instructional experiences, how do we create amazing experiences for students? What does that look like?
Okay, so there's kind of two parts in that for me. First of all, you have to know your students, right? So data becomes really, really important. And so my analogy to teachers when I'm working with them is, if we don't collect data and know where our students are at, we are shooting arrows blindfolded, hoping that we might hit a target. So being able to create, not just draw on those big formal assessments, but to quickly put together a diagnostic assessment in Socrative that shows you where your students are on a concept so you can work with them is really, really powerful. Because when you've got that knowledge, then you can move into planning your lesson and differentiating those opportunities for people. So I think there's so much great work we can do around diagnostic, formative, summative assessment, self-assessment, even the whole, retrieval practice side of things. And
just on that bit, Lou, before we move on to before we kind of move on to the other kind of areas for student experiences, the one thing I have to say with Shobi, with Socrative actually, that I find quite powerful is the fact that you're getting real-time data as you're doing the assessments, and the fact that this is a great example of tradition. Without the technology, I just couldn't do that with the kids in the class. I have to rely on hands going up, or kind of cards being held up and so on. And so what I find really amazing is the fact that I can see responses from all 25-30 students in the class. I can see who hasn't responded. I can see where the level of understanding is, right? And therefore the next step that I take, and John had to talk a lot about this, moving learning forward, right? What am I going to do to move learning forward? Well, actually, based on what I'm seeing in real time, right, for the last 20 minutes of learning that's gone on, I can then decide how do I move learning forward, or do I need to recap and so on. And for me, that's kind of, it's simple, but it's one of those kind of consistently good threads, I think, that should be there within education. So anyway, I felt like I had to kind of mention that. Go on.
I love that. And I'd have to say as well, I love that I can do a quiz in Socrative, and because it's connected to Shobi, the kids get the results, and they can then go back and annotate it straight away and write down, things I need to remember. It's not the assessment's the end of the line. The assessment's the beginning of a whole new conversation. I think that's really rich, So, I mean, Hattie says the assessment's as much for the teacher to reflect on how they've taught, but it's also there for the student, and it's not a measurement of whether you passed or failed. It's how am I going with this, and what can I do, and how can I set goals for myself to move forward.
So sorry, I kind of interrupted you earlier on, but you were talking about like instructional experiences for students. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So when we're creating a great learning experience for students, we want to make sure we're reducing the cognitive load as much as possible, right? Because we don't want them to be focused on the technology. We want them to be focused on the content we want them to learn. So for me, we can do a lot in terms of how we design our lessons. My earphone there. There we go. And so for me, it's the little things like when we're putting in a comment in Shobi, let's start with an action verb. Let's say read or explain or draw, and let's put it in capitals, and then put the rest of the information in the comments. So we're cueing our students straight away about what it is we want them to do. So I think there's those kind of design things we can do. I think there's also some really good thinking we can do around dual coding as well. I love the work of Richard E. Mayer. When I found his work I was quite late to it. It was back in 2015, and when I was working for Apple, and we were looking at creating iTunes U courses and multi-touch books, and his stuff just blew my mind. When do you use a still photo? When do you use a moving image? When do you use audio? How do you combine them, right?
It's such a revelation, his stuff. When you start reading it, you start thinking, wow, like I should have known this like such a long time ago, kind of thing. But go on,
we should have been taught this, right? In teachers' college.
Yeah, absolutely. For those people that might not have heard of dual coding, just tell us a little bit about what it is.
Well, for me, it's the information goes into your brain through two ways. We've got our visual inputs and we've got our verbal inputs. And so how do we work with both of those to make the most of those two different inputs to get the right information into working memory that students can process and then move into their long-term memory. So it's being very clever with how you use your visuals. You know, if we're doing a lesson on the working of a heart, putting a picture of a love heart isn't going to do anything. That's just a decorative graphic. But if we can use a diagram of the heart where we've actually got a map of the way the blood flows through it, that is so much more powerful in understanding something than reading a paragraph about it. So you've got that opportunity to combine, but there's also, you've got to be a little bit careful about it because you can overload. You don't want to have text and voice and images as well. So there's an art to it. And I just love that. I'm really interested in how we design these really amazing lessons that not only engage students, but make learning easier, because that's what we're in the business of doing, right?
Absolutely. I absolutely love that. I think the last time, I don't know if it was the last time I was in Australia, because we did a bit of work together whilst we were there as well, right?
We did, yeah.
In previous lives as such, as we kind of toured places and so on. But the concept of dual coding, I think actually I probably talked about it more whilst I was in the Nordics than Australia. But for me, that's kind of quite powerful and essential reading for teachers in terms of, you know, understanding what that means and being able to then, you know, build on strategies that are there. So brilliant, really good stuff. I'm kind of looking at time, and this always happens. Like starts off at like, you know, like 9 o'clock UK time. We've started, and 26 minutes have just kind of flown by. And it always happens when I get into these kind of conversations. So, kind of moving along, Lou. There's always this challenge, and I think like probably one of the, I suppose, very few positives that have come out of the whole COVID thing is it's accelerated teachers using technology. Some teachers I've spoken to, they've absolutely loved it. Hey, this is really good. I can take some of this back into my classroom. Others have hated it because it's just been like dropped on them, and they've suddenly had to kind of do things in this way. Students, I mean, I've got 3 in my house. It's been a real mixed bag. Like some of them, based on their personalities, have really loved like, hey, I can just get on with my work at home, but I miss the social part. Others are kind of like, no, I still want to be, I would have preferred to be in the classroom. So it's kind of, it's been interesting speaking to students about this as well. But in the current kind of state that we are in the world, with all these choices, with applications and technologies and apps and different devices and all of that, how do we get teachers to kind of, you know, get onto that journey of adoption, right? How do we kind of get teachers to kind of, you know, change their mindsets in thinking about, hey, you know, like, rather than completely negate the whole thing around technology, and be able to kind of make an informed choice around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I'm working with leaders and we're looking at planning, one of my big messages to them is you have to spend as much money on professional learning as you do on the devices. Anything less than that, and you're not actually going to have the impact. And this is something you need to do over time. And it needs to be proper professional learning, not training. And look, I've learned these things the hard way over time. If there's been a mistake, I've made it in my career. And if you just get up and say, here's this great tool, hey, here's Shobi, and it can do this, 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 at the end of the session, your teachers will say, wow, that's really cool, but I can't see how it will work in my classroom. So I think the work we have as leaders and the work that our amazing learning specialists are doing that we now have at Shobi is to go across that chasm, if you like, and work with the teacher at their point of practice and say, what are you working on? You know, what's your focus for the next fortnight or the next term? And let's actually look at some examples of what that looks like, because seeing is believing. So helping teachers see how that can be created is really powerful. But then the second one for me is empowering them to believe they can do it themselves. In my whole time as a coach, I've chosen not to do demonstrations in the classroom because I don't think it works. I think it shows what's possible, right? But it doesn't help the teacher own it themselves. And I want that teacher to believe they can do it by themselves. So I think the work we do with them is really to help them unpack what they're trying to do, make those connections with the tools that are available, and empower them to be able to go back into the classroom and do it themselves, because that's then sustainable, right? And that's what we want. We don't, no person who's being a coach in a school wants a whole heap of people depending on them. We don't want the kids to cheer when the coach comes in. We want them to cheer when the teacher comes in. And so I think as leaders and as coaches, it's really important we support teachers to be able to do it themselves. And that means meeting them exactly at their point of practice.
Really, really powerful. That really powerful. Lou, but it's kind of been fantastic and fascinating to speak with you again. It's been great having you on the show. I know that it's just been 7 weeks, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be some pretty significant impact on teaching and learning in the APAC region as well. And hopefully in the future, we will do this again, where you can tell us more about different countries you've been working with, impact that you're seeing in the classrooms, and so on with Shobi and Socrative. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the live stream.
Thanks, Abdul. It's been a pleasure.